What if most human suffering does not come from life itself, but from the way we cling to it? This is the question at the heart of the philosophy of the Buddha. More than 2,500 years ago, Siddhartha Gautama, the man who became known as the Buddha, began a search for something deeper than pleasure, power, or success. He was born into privilege, protected from the harsh realities of human existence. But once he encountered sickness, old age, and death, he could no longer ignore the truth that suffering is woven into life. That realization changed him completely. He left behind comfort and status, not because he rejected life, but because he wanted to understand it. He wanted to know why human beings suffer, why even moments of happiness feel unstable, and whether true peace is possible. The Buddhist philosophy begins with a simple but uncomfortable observation. Life, as most people live it, contains suffering. This does not mean that life is only pain, or that there is no beauty in it. The point is deeper than that. Even in joy, there is fragility. We fear losing what we love. We worry that success will fade. We feel anxiety even in good moments because somewhere inside us we know they will not last. According to the Buddha, suffering does not exist only in extreme pain, grief, or tragedy. It also exists in restlessness, dissatisfaction, frustration, and the subtle feeling that something is always missing. Human beings keep chasing one more achievement, one more possession, one more relationship, one more moment of recognition, believing that the next thing will finally complete them. But the mind remains unsettled. Desire may be briefly satisfied, but it rises again in a new form.
This insight led the Buddha to one of his central teachings. The cause of suffering is craving. We crave pleasure, certainty, control, identity, security, approval, and permanence in a world where nothing remains fixed. We want things to stay as they are when they make us happy, and we want painful experiences to disappear immediately when they hurt us. In both cases, we are fighting reality. The Buddha saw that much of human suffering comes from this resistance. We do not simply experience life, we demand that life obey our desires. We want people not to change, emotions not to fade, youth not to pass, and uncertainty not to exist. But reality does not bend to our wishes. Everything changes, and because we cling to what is unstable as if it were permanent, we suffer. Impermanence is one of the deepest ideas in Buddhist philosophy. Everything in existence is in motion. Bodies age, relationships shift, thoughts come and go, feelings rise and fall, and even the image we have of ourselves changes across time. Nothing stands still. Yet human beings often live as if stability can be secured forever. We build identities around things that cannot last. We say, this is my success, my reputation, my role, my story, my certainty, my life, and then we are shocked when change tears through it. For the Buddha, wisdom begins when a person stops denying impermanence and starts seeing it clearly. This is not meant to make life feel bleak. In fact, it can make life more vivid. When you understand that everything is temporary, you may begin to value it more honestly. You stop trying to possess life, and you begin to encounter it with greater awareness.
Another radical part of the Buddha's philosophy is the idea of non-self. Most people assume there is a solid, permanent I at the center of their experience, some fixed self that remains unchanged beneath all the movement of life. The Buddha challenged this assumption. He taught that what we call the self is not a permanent essence, but a flowing process made of thoughts, memories, sensations, emotions, habits, and perceptions. The self is real as an experience, but it is not fixed or independent in the way people imagine. This idea is difficult because the ego wants solidity. It wants to feel separate, important, defended, and enduring. But the Buddha believed that much of our suffering comes from protecting and glorifying this imagined self. We become offended too easily, threatened too quickly, and attached too deeply because we are constantly defending an identity that is always changing anyway.
To understand this is not to say that a person does not exist. It is to say that identity is more fluid than it appears. The person you were as a child is not the person you are now. Your beliefs, desires, fears, and even your sense of self have shifted many times. Once you see this clearly, you may begin to loosen your attachment to ego. That loosening can bring freedom. You become less trapped by pride, less consumed by comparison, and less wounded by the need to always protect an image of who you think you are. The Buddha's philosophy is not about erasing individuality. It is about seeing through illusion and reducing the suffering that illusion creates. At the center of Buddhist thought are the Four Noble Truths. First, life contains suffering. Second, suffering is caused by craving and attachment. Third, the end of suffering is possible. Fourth, there is a path that leads to that freedom. These truths are not presented as dogma to be accepted blindly. They're more like diagnoses and observations. The Buddha approached human suffering almost like a physician. He identified the condition, located its cause, affirmed that healing is possible, and then offered a method. This practical dimension is one of the reasons his philosophy remains so powerful. It is not merely speculative. It does not exist only to explain life. It exists to transform the way life is lived. That transforming path is known as the Noble Eightfold Path. It includes right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. In essence, it is a discipline of wisdom, ethical living, and mental training. The Buddha understood that suffering cannot be ended through intellectual knowledge alone. A person may understand the theory of peace and still be ruled by anger, greed, jealousy, fear, and confusion. That is why Buddhist philosophy insists on practice. It asks a person to train the mind, purify intention, speak honestly, act compassionately, and become more aware of the present moment. Freedom is not achieved by merely believing the right ideas. It emerges through inner transformation. Mindfulness is especially important in this philosophy. Today, the word is often used casually, but in the Buddhist teaching, it is something very profound. Mindfulness means seeing clearly what is happening in the present moment without immediately grasping, rejecting, or becoming lost in it. It means observing thoughts as thoughts, feelings as feelings, and sensations as sensations. Normally, the mind is pulled in every direction by memory, desire, fear, and fantasy. It is rarely at rest. The Buddha believed that by cultivating awareness, a person begins to see the mechanics of suffering directly. You notice how desire arises, how anger takes shape, how fear grows, how attachment forms, and how the ego builds stories around every experience. Once seen clearly, these patterns begin to lose their power. Awareness creates space between experience and reaction. In that space, wisdom becomes possible.
Meditation, in the Buddhist sense, is not about escaping the world. It is about understanding the mind so deeply that you are no longer ruled by it blindly. The Buddha saw that most people are driven by impulses they do not examine. They chase what feels pleasant, avoid what feels painful, and build their lives around these unconscious movements. Meditation slows this process down. It reveals the impermanent nature of thoughts and emotions. It shows that even intense fear or desire is not permanent. Everything arises and passes away. This insight can be liberating. Instead of being controlled by mental storms, a person learns to witness them without being destroyed by them. Compassion is another essential part of the Buddhist philosophy. Sometimes people mistakenly think Buddhism is only about detachment, as if the goal were to become emotionally distant or indifferent. But true detachment in Buddhist thought does not mean coldness. It means not clinging. It means loving without possessiveness, caring without control, and helping without ego. The Buddha understood that when a person sees suffering clearly in themselves, they also begin to recognize it in everyone else. Every human being struggles with fear, loss, insecurity, desire, and impermanence. From that recognition, compassion naturally grows. Wisdom and compassion must remain together. Wisdom without compassion becomes dry and distant. Compassion without wisdom can become blind and overwhelming. But together they form a balanced response to life. The Buddha's philosophy also stands out because it does not rely on blind faith in the way many people expect from religion. Its emphasis is often on direct insight. The Buddha did not simply ask people to accept authority. He encouraged observation, practice, and understanding. In this sense, his teaching is almost experimental. Look at your own mind. Observe your suffering. Notice how attachment operates. Pay attention to the way expectations shape disappointment. See how desire promises satisfaction and then renews itself again. The truth must be realized, not merely repeated. This is why Buddhist philosophy has influenced not only spiritual traditions, but also psychology, ethics, and modern reflections on consciousness. In today's world, the philosophy of the Buddha feels especially relevant. Modern life is full of stimulation, speed, comparison, pressure, and endless desire. People are told to optimize themselves constantly, to consume more, achieve more, display more, and prove more. But this endless movement often creates exhaustion rather than peace. The Buddhist teaching offers a very different perspective. It suggests that peace is not found by multiplying possessions or accomplishments, but by understanding the mind that is always chasing them. It reminds us that external success cannot fully solve inner confusion. A person may appear powerful, admired, and wealthy, yet remain restless and deeply dissatisfied. Without wisdom, no amount of external gain can produce lasting peace.
The Buddha's philosophy is ultimately a philosophy of awakening. To awaken means to stop living mechanically, stop being dragged around by craving and fear, and start seeing reality with clarity. It means recognizing that suffering is real, but also recognizing that freedom from unnecessary suffering is possible. It means understanding that life is fragile and changing, yet still deeply meaningful. It means loosening the ego, releasing unhealthy attachments, and meeting the world with greater awareness and compassion. The goal is not to become superhuman. The goal is to become free in the deepest sense. Free from illusion, free from compulsive grasping, free from the constant inner pressure that comes from wanting reality to be something other than what it is. That is why the philosophy of the Buddha still speaks to people across cultures and centuries. It does not promise an easy life. It offers something more honest and more profound. It offers a way to understand suffering without despair, to face impermanence without fear, and to live with wisdom in a world that never stops changing. Its message is not that life must be escaped, but that it must be seen clearly. And perhaps that is the heart of it all. The moment we truly begin to see clearly, we also begin to suffer less.